The reality is, most of us, we have these people that we don't say it to them, but we say something like, I hate buying for them because I can never figure out what they need or what they like. And it's just, it's almost not even fun because you're just laboring trying to figure out what to get this person. And I know people like that. I know people that they go so far is that they go out and buy their own gift, right? Because they're that person. Maybe you're that person that everybody's having a hard time buying for. And so they know they're that person. They go out and buy their own gift. They give it to, a family member, have the family member pay them, then the family member wraps it up, puts it under the tree, and they act surprised on Christmas. Do you know anybody like that? Yeah, I know somebody. I'm married to somebody like that. Yeah. Because they know what they want, but we don't know what they want, and they don't know what they want, and sometimes until they see it, and you're not with them, so they just go ahead and get it, and then they tell you, hey, give this to me for Christmas. Okay, shoots, that works for me. But it seems like there's always someone that we have a struggle buying that special gift for, right? Some people are just hard to buy for, especially when we talk about people. How do you buy something for someone who has what? Everything, right? They really don't have everything, but it seems like they have everything that's anything, and so it's hard to buy for them. And we've got to be careful, that we don't get ourselves so wrapped up, no pun intended, in buying Christmas presents that we don't forget that it's not about the presents, but it's about His presence, right? And so we find ourselves maybe so consumed with this whole idea of wanting to get the right gift and get that gift for the person that's hard to buy for that we forget what it's all about. We forget that it's really about Jesus. It's His birthday, right? I mean, stop and think about the irony of that. How many times have you known somebody who has a birthday and everybody else gets the gift except the person whose birthday it is, right? That seems kind of crazy. It's Jesus' birthday and we're running around buying each other gifts, and it's like, well, what gift does Jesus get? And you go, well, what do you get Jesus? I mean, talk about the person that's got everything. What do you get? The King of Kings, right? What do you get? The Creator of the universe. You talk about somebody hard to buy for. But the reality is, there is one thing that Jesus wants from us. There is one thing that only you can give Him that no one else can give Him. And that is your worship. Your worship. And we started this series last week designed to help us to remember that Christmas is a time to worship Him. And the title that we picked comes right out of Matthew chapter 2. Verse 1 says this: Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, Where is He who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw His star in the east and have come, would you say it with me, to worship Him. I pointed out last week that one of the significant things about this passage is that these Magi didn't come to get anything. They came to give their worship. And so different has Christmas become that we find ourselves following everything but the pattern of these Magi who came to give. Tradition tells us that there was 3 of them. We call them Magi. Most people know them as the wise men, and there's kind of traditional reason for that. But these Magi, we think that were 3 because they had 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But the reality is the Bible doesn't tell us how many of them there were. In fact, tradition tells us that there was probably more, upwards maybe to 12 of them. And they didn't travel alone. More than likely, they had an entourage with them because they were official kind of individuals. And so they may have had 50, 60, 100 different people with them as they traveled. That's why when you read in this story in Matthew chapter 2, that when they came in and they were asking this question, where is he who's born King of the Jews, that it stirred up all of Jerusalem. 3 guys aren't going to stir up all of Jerusalem just by asking that question. But if you walk into a city and you've got a bunch of people with you and you're all official and you go, hey, where's the King of the Jews been born? You're going to stir up the city. And so we talk about 3 guys and we have this kind of romantic notion that they were on camels. We don't even know if they were on camels. The picture looks good, doesn't it? It looks festive, kind of makes you, we don't know. They might have been. There's a good chance that they were because they came from the east, but we don't know for sure. That's not biblical. But what we do know, what we absolutely know for sure, is that these magi traveled over rugged terrain for many, many miles with the sole purpose and the sole goal to worship the newborn king. They came with a desire to worship him. And we think so many times, because of the Christian circles that we're in and the way that we do things on a Sunday morning, we associate worship so much with singing, with music. And there's no record that the wise men ever sang. Not that you can't sing in worship. In fact, Scripture is filled with references to worship in song. But the wise men didn't come to sing Jesus a song. In fact, the word worship in Matthew chapter 2, it means this. It means to bow as an act of allegiance, to prostrate oneself or kneel as an act of reverence. The reality is these wise men, these magi, didn't come to sing Jesus a song, but they did come to worship, and more than likely they fell on their faces before a baby. And probably somewhere between 2 and younger. By the way, this didn't happen on the night of his birth. And if you read the text closer, you realize that. But a little baby, a toddler, maybe. And they prostrated themselves. They bowed before him, and they worshiped him. Today, I want to zero in on one of the ways they worshiped him. It's something that I believe is important for us to take note of. And we see it in verse 11 of Matthew chapter 2. It says, after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground, and they worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they presented to him gifts. The word gifts there in the original, it means a gift presented as an expression of honor, right? So many times we give gifts today and it's more of an expression of, oh, I'll give this to you if you give one to me, right? But this was an expression of honor with no strings attached. I don't expect you to give me anything. I just want to show you honor and reverence and your worth. And that's what worship means. To demonstrate worth toward the object or the person being worshiped. And these guys came and they brought their gifts. Today we're going to talk about this whole idea that when we come to worship him, bring your gifts. Bring your gifts. But then we're back to that question, what do you bring Jesus? What on earth could you possibly bring him? And of course, we said it's worship, but what does that look like? What is involved in that? And I want to give you just a few ideas out of this passage this morning that I think will help us in this idea of bringing our gifts. Here's the first one this morning. It's in verse 1 of Matthew 2. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. It's estimated that the magi were coming from Persia, which they think that's where they came from, that it would have been about a 900-mile journey. 900 miles. Probably would have taken upwards to 2 months to make the trip. They see the star. Now, these magi were, they were stargazers. They were the scientists of their day. And by the way, the word magi later kind of evolved into where we get our word magic or magician. Because they tried all different kinds of experiments and all different kinds of things, but one of the branches of magi were they read the stars. They studied the stars. And we know what that's all about when we look at ancient Hawaiian history, right? That's how they navigated. And so the stars told many things, but we're told in scriptures that the stars also pointed to the Messiah. And you say, well, where did these guys get all that information? Well, those of you that are studying the book of Daniel, guess what? Daniel was sent with a bunch of other Jews to exile into Babylon. And so we believe that Daniel was the guy that taught some of these guys hundreds of years before, and the magi that came to see Jesus were the offspring of the magi that Daniel had taught 500 and some years earlier. But the point is this. It took a lot of time for them to make that journey. And so one of the things that I want you to see this morning is one of the gifts that we're to bring is the gift of your time. The gift of your time. One of the most precious gifts that we can give is our time. Somebody says, you know, the old saying is that time is money. You ever heard that saying? Hey, time is money, man. Time is money. No. You know what time is? Time is life. Time is life. When I give you time, I'm giving you, listen, literally, a chunk of my life. When I say, you know what, I'm going to spend some time with you, what I'm saying is I'm going to spend a chunk of my life with you. When you say, man, I don't have time for that, what you're saying is my life is worth more than the investment that's being asked me to make in that. Do you realize that when you work, when you go to a job and they give you a paycheck, they are actually buying chunks of your life? I mean, think about that. That's what's happening. Your life, some of you, your life is worth $20 an hour. Some of you a lot less. Yes, say amen. Some of you a lot more, right? But the reality is, our time is just a measurement of our life. And so when these magi took off, they were saying, you know what? This is worth not just my time, this is worth my life to invest in. When we worship God, we are investing our lives in that when we take the time to do it. So he says, well, you know, I don't have time to go to church. I don't have time to spend with God reading His Word. I just don't have time for that. What you're saying is it's not valuable. It's not worth investing my life into. We look at somebody and we say, I don't have time for you. That's a very deep statement. My life is not worth investing in you. And when we say, God, I'm sorry, I don't have time for you, what we're saying is, God, my life, you are not worth investing my life into. Wow, do you not understand how serious that is? We're talking about the God who created us, and I don't have time for you. I don't have life to put into you, God. Thank you for everything you've given me. Thank you for how you've blessed me. And by the way, God, could you keep doing it? But I don't have time for you. Okay, I'll carve out a couple of hours for you on Sunday morning. Is that good? Is that good, God? Is that going to keep you satisfied? And so we do that just to kind of keep God at bay, maybe, or to get more of that stuff, that we call blessing. But really, in actuality, if truth were told, man, I just don't have time. I've got too much to do. Sometimes we put parameters on God. Okay, God, I'll give you this much time and no more. Man, it's just so hard to, okay, I'll take 5 minutes every morning and read the Word. And if God doesn't speak to me in that 5 minutes, that's all you got, God. 5 minutes, let's go. I've only got a few minutes to pray, God. I just don't have enough time. So, I know there's probably more people that need to be prayed for, but I don't have time. I don't want to invest my life in that, God, so I'm just going to give you this amount of time. It's dangerous stuff, folks, when you really stop and think about it, isn't it? And one thing that we can learn for these magi is that they gave the gift of time. They said, this is worth investing our lives in. The second gift that I see in this passage is in verse 11, Matthew 2:11. Now, let me back it up here and say, if you're not familiar with the story, you know about the wise men, the magi, but you're not real familiar with the story. The magi show up. Hey, where is he? He's born king of the Jews. Herod, the king, who's an egomaniac, is just all upset because a king has been born. So you got to understand why Herod would be upset, because Herod was not in the line to be king. He was kind of an illegitimate king. And so to think that there may be a true king that has been born, he's going to be in big trouble. In fact, Herod was such an egomaniac and so paranoid that somebody was going to take his kingdom, he actually had his own brothers killed so that they wouldn't take over the kingdom. And he ended up with 9 wives, and a couple of those he killed along the way too. Neat guy. But anyway, the magi show up about this king that they want to worship, and he's kind of, in a panic. So he goes to the priest and the scribes, and he says, hey, tell me, where's this Messiah supposed to be born? That tells you how much he knew Scripture, right? And the priests come back and they say, well, in Bethlehem, the Messiah is supposed to be born in Bethlehem. And so the king comes back out and he calls the magi in and he says, okay, boys, it's Bethlehem. Bethlehem's about 5 miles outside of town. And he points them in the right direction. And then he says, by the way, when you're done worshiping him, make sure you come back and tell me, because I want to go worship him too. And it tells us he didn't want to worship him, he wanted to kill him, right? So the magi leave, and they go out, and they see the star, and it stops above the house where Jesus was. And it says in verse 11, after coming into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell to the ground, and they worshipped him. Then opening up their treasures, they presented to him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Now, there's something that you could miss there if you're not really zeroing in on it. They found the house. They found the child. They spent that time to get there. They spent that time to get to him. They invested their life into it. The time was there. Now it's time, not just for the time, but the gift of attention. They were giving now their attention. Now, wouldn't it have been a shame if they found Jesus, they found this King of Kings, they come in, drop off their gifts, hey, we got to get back. It's a long way back. We'll see you guys. Thanks so much, but we can't stay. They gave all that time, but no attention. I think some of you can relate to this. Do you know someone that they can be in your presence? They can be in your realm. They can be spending time with you, but you're pretty sure that you don't have their attention? Can you relate to that at all? I mean, they can be in the same room with you. You can be having a conversation, thinking from time to time that maybe they're picking up something, but they're really not paying attention. In fact, you'll stop and you'll say something like, you're not paying attention, are you? You haven't heard a word that I've said, have you? And they'll say something like, sure, I heard what you said. And you'll say something like, what did I say?
Have you been in our house?
Yeah. No, I've been in my house. That's where I've been.
See, the reality is you can invest time but not attention into a situation. These guys were about giving time, bringing the gift of time, but they were also willing to pay attention to the situation. They were also willing to say, you know what, this isn't just about us coming. This is about us giving our attention. Hey, we do that. We do it in a service like this. We can come, we can do our time, but not really focus our attention. Somebody asked us on Monday, hey, what'd you do yesterday? Well, I went to church. Oh, really? What'd they talk about? Something out of the Bible. I didn't zero in. I didn't pay attention. I had so many other things going on. There were so many other things grabbing my attention that I couldn't focus my attention and give that gift in worship that I know my God deserves. My God deserves my attention, not just my presence. God, I'm here, aren't I? Great. You're giving me your time. How about your attention? How about focusing on me? You got to know, when these magi found Jesus, they prostrated themselves. They fell to the ground. Their attention was zeroed in on the object in which they had invested their time. Folks, when we come to worship, it's about our time, but it's also about our attention. You ever sit down, you ever go, yeah, I know I need to read my Bible, I know I need to get going on this, it's been a while, and so you sit down and you read, and you find you've read maybe 6, 7 verses, and you bring your head up, and you go, I don't really have a clue what I just read. Because you were thinking about what you got to do tomorrow, or you were thinking about what you got to do later today, or you were thinking about what took place last night, and so all of a sudden now you're not focused. There's no attention being given, and so you're giving your time but not attention. And so really, what good is it, right? God wants us to come to Him to worship, and yeah, we got to invest our time, but we also bring that gift of attention. The next one's found in that same verse. They fell on the ground, they worshiped Him, then opening their treasures. Some of your translations may say treasure boxes or treasure chests. That's the picture here, that they had these boxes, these chests, and within them were these gifts. They presented to Him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. These were the physical gifts that they were bringing Jesus. Time, attention, those aren't physical, but here we see some physical gifts. When we come to worship, the idea is that we're to bring the gift of our treasure, Very interesting, and there's a lot of debate on this, but I think this is pretty good. Why gold, frankincense, and myrrh? Well, for one thing, they were very valuable. They were very costly. But there seems to be some symbolic reason for this, right? The gold would have represented royalty. This was the king. What do you bring a king? You bring him gold, right? You bring him the most precious commodity on the earth, gold. Frankincense was burned in the temple as part of the worship that went on in the temple, and it was a symbol of prayer, right? So you bring frankincense not necessarily to a king, but to God. It was a symbol of His divinity, of His deity. And then the myrrh was a spice that was used specifically for burying people. They wrapped the body in cloth, and within the cloth they put these spices, and myrrh was one of those because it was a very strong, powerful spice, and it was used in burial. And so this was picturing or looking forward to why He was born in the first place. He was born to die. So they bring these very costly and yet even very symbolic, and again, worth a lot, not just monetarily, but worth a lot in their symbolism. That's what a treasure is. A treasure is not necessarily what I give that's worth a lot if it doesn't cost me anything, right? I mean, you can take one person who can give somebody a $10 bill. Well, if they're a millionaire, that's chump change. That's nothing. But you take a person on a fixed income and they give you a $10 bill, that's a whole lot of money to them. See, it all depends on how much it's costing you. And listen, folks, true worship costs us something. There's a whole story in 2 Samuel 24, and we don't have time to look at the whole thing, but I would encourage you to go back maybe on your own, in your own quiet time, and look at 2 Samuel chapter 24. And David was king, and David had done a terrible thing. God had told him not to take a census of the people because he didn't want David to be inflated about all that he had. But David disobeyed God, took a census anyway, and so God said, okay, I'm going to punish you. You choose the punishment. And he gives him the punishments that he had to choose from. You're going to be punished. Choose, or you can let me choose for you. And so David finally decides, you know what, God, I'm going to throw myself at your mercy, and I'm going to let you choose. So God does, and there's a plague that comes on the land. And David knows that he's the one that brought this on the people because of his disobedience and sin. And so David wants to go, and he wants to worship God, build an altar to God when the whole thing has blown over. And so he finds this spot, this land, owned by this guy named Ornan. And he goes to this guy and he says, look, I want to buy your land, I want to buy your oxen, I want to buy all the wood that's there, I want to take and make an offering to the Lord. What's your price? And he goes, oh, no, you're the king. I couldn't possibly charge you anything. I'm going to give it all to you. I'll give you the land, the oxen, the wood. I'll even give you the fire for the altar. And in verse 24 of 2 Samuel 24, David said to him, no, but I will surely buy it from you for a price. For I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God, which costs me nothing. David said, no, you don't understand. This is about my worship. This is about my honoring God. I have dishonored him, and I need to now honor him, and you need to understand there needs to be a price here. It needs to cost me something. Too many times, folks, our worship becomes trivial because it costs us nothing. It's a trip in the car. It's a few minutes reading the Word. But it really hasn't cost us much of anything. And that's one of the reasons I believe that God says, hey, when you come, when you gather together as a corporate body, I want you to bring your financial treasure, and I want you to use that as part of your worship. Somebody says, hey, I don't understand something about your church. I've only been coming here for a little bit, and I understand you don't pass an offering plate. What's the deal? Well, the deal is there's nothing wrong with passing an offering plate. That's fine. We just decided years ago that what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that people were zeroing in on the worship aspect of this very important part of worship, and that is your giving of your treasures, and not worry about what someone next to you is giving or not giving, or feeling like you were being compelled to give, because then that's not real worship. And so we said, you know what? We're going to have a box, and we're going to stick the box in the back of the church. And then that way, people can give. They don't have to worry about, being compelled or having their arm twisted or looking at the person next to them going, oh man, maybe I should give as much as they give. This is between you and God, but it's a very, very important part of worship. These guys came together and they laid before this new king literal treasure worthy of a king. And folks, when we come to worship, what is it costing us? I want to give you a couple things as we just zero in on this one, because I know it's kind of a sensitive issue. And we really don't go there that much. Those of you that come here on a regular basis, we don't talk about money a whole lot. And let me tell you why. And if you've taken our core class, that comes up most of the time in our core class, which we'll have end of January. But I bring this up and we talk about it. Here's why that we don't make a big deal about it. Because we have a big God. I don't need to twist your arm and browbeat you about giving your money, because frankly, God does not need your money. And he doesn't need my money. He's a big God. And if he wants to do something, he doesn't need us to do it. He finds pleasure in bringing us into the investment.
Amen.
But he doesn't need us. And so, as far as I'm concerned, you won't hear me hitting you over the head about how much you get. We won't take 3, 4, 5 offerings during a service, because it's not about trying to get you to give. It's about trying to teach you how to worship.
Amen.
And this is a big part of it. So here's number 1. Would you put this down? Giving of your treasure, it reveals what you're really trusting in. Let me tell you how. Someone says this, you know, Andy, I want to give to the Lord, but I can't afford to worship God with my treasure. I'll never survive. You just don't understand. I just don't have it to give. I do understand that, but can I tell you something? That type of statement reveals more about your faith than it does about your finances. When you say, I couldn't possibly make it financially. If I gave, I couldn't make it. Do you really trust God to take care of you? I mean, here's the reality, folks. We'll say amen to things like this. God is big. Amen. God is large and in charge. Hallelujah. God can do anything. Amen. But if I give money, he can't take care of my bills.
Wrong answer.
You see how ridiculous we are at times? I mean, we're ready to rah-rah and rally around this mighty God that we serve. But man, talk about giving my finances. Man, Randy, now you stopped preaching and now you're meddling. And the reality is, it's amazing to me that as Christ followers, we'll trust Jesus for our salvation, but we won't trust him to take care of our finances. Does that make any sense to you at all? I will trust you, God, for my eternal destiny, but not for my temporal needs. That doesn't make sense to me, but that's the way many of us live. Oh yeah, I've embraced Jesus as Lord and Savior. I believe he died on the cross for my sin, and I have a home in heaven. Praise God. But I don't know about giving, because I just don't have it to give. And I'm really not trying to beat you up. I'm just trying to get you to see the inconsistency of what you're living. And here's why. Because ultimately you're robbing yourself of an opportunity to see God large and in charge in your life. Somebody says, well, okay, Randy, I hear you, and as soon as I get out of debt, I'm going to start giving. Well, for some of you, that may never happen. Here's the reality. Don't wait to get out of debt. If you're going to trust God, trust him now while you're in debt, and let him show himself huge in your life. Amen. Listen to Proverbs 3, 9 and 10. You may want to write this down. Proverbs 3, 9 and 10. It says this, honor, it's another way of saying worship the Lord. How? From your wealth and from the first of all your produce. Okay, but what's in it for me? Here's verse 10. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. See, the first fruits, you go, what is that? What does that mean? The first fruits were the first production of the crop. And so the first fruits, if you took those and gave them, what you were saying is, this is a big step of faith, because I don't know what the second fruits are going to look like. I don't even know if the second fruits are going to come in. If I give God the first fruits, there's no guarantee that there's not going to be a flood or a drought or a pestilence, and I could lose the second fruit. So this is a big step of faith to give the first fruits, but that's what God's saying. Listen, trust me, give me the first of your crops. But God, I don't know, trust me, but it might, trust me. See, that's what he's saying here. And what I'm going to do for you, if you will trust me in that way, I'm going to fill your barns with plenty, and I'm going to overflow your vats. I'm going to take care of you above and beyond, is what he's saying. One of my favorite stories in the New Testament is when Jesus and his disciples are hanging out in the temple, and they're watching people. And they're watching people in this one particular place in the temple. See, the temple was kind of built with the same idea that we have a box. They had this horn-shaped thing that went into the wall and dropped into a box, and that's where you put your money, your offering, when you went to the temple. And so this story talks about Jesus and his disciples standing there and watching people as they were going by dropping their money into this horn. And the disciples were impressed because there were some wealthy people just dumping stuff in there and they're going, wow, Jesus, look at all that. And then there comes this poor widow. And in Mark 12 it says this, a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which amount to about a cent. Calling his disciples to him, he said to them, I tell you the truth, this poor widow put in more than all the contributors to the treasury. For they all put in out of their surplus, but she out of her poverty put in all she owned, all she had to live on. Jesus said, hey guys, you were so impressed with all those rich people that were putting in. That was their surplus. That didn't hurt. That didn't really even cost them anything. I want you to watch this widow. Watch. 2 copper coins. Jesus, what is that? It's not even worth a penny. That wouldn't even buy a pigeon for a sacrifice, Jesus. He said, but I tell you the truth. She put in everything she had to live on. Her worship costs her deeply. See, when you and I give of our treasure, it's going to demonstrate what we're really trusting in. Number 2, giving of your treasure reveals who your master really is. Who's your master? Jesus said in Matthew 6:24, no one can serve 2 masters, for either you're going to hate one and love the other, or you're going to be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't serve God and wealth. See, you've got to understand a Jewish mindset, an Oriental mindset in that day. Everything was black and white, literally. We talk about black and white people today. This was a culture of black and white. If you chose one thing over the other, then their term was, what you chose you loved, what you discarded you hated. Now see, that is so foreign to us, because if I have 2 pieces of cake up here, Eddie, and one is chocolate, and one is white, and I say, which one do you want, Ed? And he goes, oh, can I have both? And I say, no, you can only have one of these pieces. And of course, we know what he's going to choose. He's going to go for the chocolate every time. And so I say, okay, Ed, we've just established you love chocolate and you hate white cake. And he goes, no. I really like white cake. I just would rather have chocolate cake. And I said, that's what I said. You chose this. You only could choose between 2. You chose this, you love this, and you hate this. No, you don't understand. No, Ed, you don't understand. When you took this, then you rejected this. See? And so Jesus said, you can't have 2 masters. You can only choose one. And if you're living for wealth, that's your master. Well, man, I'm not living for wealth. I'm just telling you I don't have any money to give. Well, that's kind of a twisted way of letting money control your decisions. And money becomes your master. See, you don't have to be rich to be living for money. Do you realize that? You don't have to be wealthy to be living for stuff. I've known poor, desperate people that longed for and wanted all kinds of stuff. They were living for stuff. Just as much as a wealthy person who has all kinds of money just kind of hoards it all and buys it all. They were hoarding and buying in their mind, and if they had opportunity, they were going to do it. See, giving of your treasure, it's going to reveal who your master is. I am not going to let this master me. I have a master, and I'm going to honor him with this. Here's number 3. Giving of your treasure reveals, ultimately, what's really important to you. See, because here's the reality, folks. I want you to stop and think about this with me. We don't really have a giving problem. We give all the time. We give to Amazon. We give to Camoys. We give to Chevron. We give to Pizza Cafe. You go, oh, but that's stuff that I need. Yeah, right. The extra order of breadsticks, you really needed that, right? See, we give all the time. It's not a giving problem. The problem is, who would I rather give to? Right? And so, when we give of our treasure, when we bring and worship with our treasure, it's going to reveal what's really important to us. Who do we really want to give to? We give to things that are important to us. The average American Christian gives about 2% of their income. It shows what's really important to us. It shows what's really our master. And it shows what we're really trusting in. So I know when we talk about this kind of stuff, the big question is, so how much should I give, Randy? Tell me, how much should I give? And I know some of you come from a background, I came from a background that taught very specifically that it's about the tithe, that you need to give a tithe. And the word tithe in the Old Testament means a tenth. And we can go to places in the Old Testament that appear to point to the idea that we're supposed to give a tenth. There's a problem with that, though. The problem is this. When you begin to really study the Old Testament, you find out that there wasn't just a tithe, but there were tithes, plural. And if you added up, the Jewish people were supposed to give a number of tithes at different times, and when you add it all up, it comes to be about 23% of their income. And so when people tell me, yeah, the Bible teaches that I'm supposed to give a tithe, my first thought is, are you giving 23% of your income? Oh, no, I'm giving a tenth. Well, then you're not really giving a Jewish tithe. You're not really giving what the Old Testament taught. You say, wait a minute, Randy, are you telling me I'm supposed to give 23% of my income? No, I'm not telling you that. I'm telling you that I think it's faulty to go to the Old Testament and talk about a tenth when it really wasn't just a tenth. It was more than that. When we get to the New Testament, we find out something a little bit different. In 1 Corinthians 16:2, Paul says, on the first day of each week, Sunday, you should each put aside a portion of the money you've earned. Don't wait until I come there and then try to collect it all at once. So Paul said, on the first day of the week, Sunday, when you come together, put aside a portion of the income that you've earned. Use that for the church. Use that for expenses. You say, but that doesn't help. It doesn't say the amount. I need to know what percentage. Because some of you just tell me. I know it's going to hurt. Could you just tell me? Okay, I'll tell you. It's between you and God. Somebody says, well, is a tenth okay? Yeah. I think that would be great. But some of you have never practiced worshiping with your treasure. And so I would say, start with a smaller percentage so that you don't have a heart attack in the process. Start somewhere. But as you do it, seek God on what you're to give. Folks, I hesitate to tell you this because I in no way want the focus to be on me. But I just want to, I share this with you only because I want you to know that God's going to take care of you. You know, Louise and I, years ago, when we first got married, we started right away. You know what? God's got to get a part of our income. And we started giving a certain percentage. And then as time went on and you know, we were growing in our walk with the Lord and we were growing together as a couple, and we said, you know what do you think? Do you think God wants us to give more this year? And so we began to pray about it. We came together, and every time we've done this, we've been in agreement on how much it is that God's telling us to give. And so we went from about maybe 7% of our income, and we jumped it up to about 10%. And then over the years, it was a big stretch, but we said, maybe God's calling us to give 15% of our income. And so then we did that for a few years, and then just saw God blessing us, and we said, man, maybe we should be giving more. Maybe we're not trusting God enough. And so over the years, folks, we've gotten to the point where we give 50% of our income to the Lord. Now, I'm not telling you that. I'm not all that, trust me. I'm just as much a scaredy cat as you are. But I've had many, many years to see God bless. You cannot outgive God. There's just no way. There's no way. Some of you, we don't get a full income here from the church. We rely on a lot of folks back on the mainland who believe in our ministry that we're doing here, and they give. We don't ever know exactly how much we're going to have each month. So we don't really have a solid budget because we don't know how much. But you know what? Never not paid a bill. I'll tell you something else. We have no debt, zero debt. We pay cash for everything. You use a credit card? Yep, every month. Put everything on a credit card. You know why? Frequent flyer mileage. But we pay it off every month, right? And we also make sure that God gets the first fruits. Now, I tell you that because of this. I think we ask the wrong question. It's not how much should I give? It's how much should I keep? Because it's all God's anyway. So if God puts it in my hands, it's His, and He says, I want you to steward this, then I've got to come to a place where I go, well, God, this is yours. How much do you want me to keep? And He'll tell you. I promise you, He will tell you. And when you begin to trust Him, and you begin to worship Him with your treasure, watch out. Because you will begin to see Him do things. Now, I want to be very careful. Blessing doesn't always come financially. You understand that now. Oh, I'm going to give 10 and see if I'll get 20 next. No, it doesn't. It's not. God is not the stock market, all right? But I will promise you something. If you will trust God with your finances, and you will be a good steward of what He's placed in your hand, to understand it is not yours. That every time you come to purchase something, you're going to ask God, is this the car I should buy? Is it okay for me to take your money and invest it in this vehicle? Lord, my washer's not working. Should I buy a new one? Or is there a used one I can get? See, what happens is your mentality is totally different. Because now it's not about my money, it's about God's money and how much you want me to keep and what do you want me to spend. I'm just a steward. And we've got to ask the right question and seek God's counsel and watch His powerful work in action. These magi came, and they gave time, they gave attention, they gave their treasure. And the last one that I see here as we come to worship, the gift that's most important to give is you. God wants you. Romans 12:1 says this, I urge you, I beg you, brothers and sisters, by the mercy of God, present your bodies as a living and a holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, listen, which is your spiritual service of worship. God wants you. He wants me. And all that that's involved in. See, when I come here on a Sunday morning and I'm speaking to you like I am now, this is part of my worship. God has given me the ability to do what I do to feed the body, and I'm worshiping Him in giving myself to that. When the worship team stands up here and they use their talents and their gifts, they are worshiping and leading us in worship. They are giving of themselves to the Lord. When the folks that come in here and they set up chairs and screens and put up plants and sweep floors, they are giving themselves in acts of worship. When I live my life outside of this church in a way that pleases God, my life becomes a worship act for Him. In fact, Colossians 3:17 says this, whatever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through Him to God the Father. And the amazing thing about that is as you go on further, he begins to give some illustration of what that looks like. And the first place he goes is the home. He talks about the wife's role, the man's role, the kid's role, and then he goes into the job, what you're to be on the job. And the reality is, folks, he just wants us. He wants us. And he wants to live out through us, and he wants our lives to be acts of worship for him. So what is the one gift that you can give, ultimately, that only you can give? And it's you and your worship, your life of worship. Nobody else can give that except you. And that's what he's calling us to. He's calling us to worship him. And when we come to worship him, he's calling us to come with raised hands, symbolically and figuratively. And he's calling us to come to worship with our gifts, our time, our attention, our treasure, ourselves. He wants us to be true worshipers. Would you bow your heads, please, and close your eyes?